Hey, what's up? John Sonmez from simpleprogrammer.com. So today thought I would talk about a topic that a lot of people, a lot of society's influence tends to shy away from, which is conflict, right? We all don't like conflict. We don't want to get into it. But that's actually a bad attribute. And I'm going to talk about a little bit today why we don't want to avoid conflict, how to actually get into productive conflict, and why conflict is good. So first of all, let's talk about what conflict is and why we are pressured to avoid conflict. So a lot of us today have this idea of being a peacekeeper, a peacemaker. We try to avoid conflict at all costs, and we think that's the best, right? We think we're being diplomatic. Now, we should all be diplomatic. Guarantee you that 90% of the problems that I solve as much as I can in a diplomatic way. And a good book on being diplomatic is How to Win Friends and Influence People. One of my top books. You should definitely read that book, and you should understand how to operate with people and to avoid conflict as much as possible that you can. But there are certain times when you don't need to avoid conflict, and avoiding conflict is bad. In fact, if you live your life trying to avoid conflict, that is going to have negative repercussions, because there are certain situations where conflict is necessary. And if you cannot step up, and if you cannot embrace conflict and learn how to fight properly, and that's what I'm going to teach you hopefully in this video, is how to fight properly, how to properly engage in conflict. If you can't do that, then you're going to get trampled on, your boundaries are going to get walked on, you're going to appear weak, and you're never going to get what you actually want. So let's talk a little bit about what we can do, right? Or why conflict is good. So conflict, again, a lot of people think this is bad, but conflict is not bad. It's how you engage in the conflict that is good or bad. So many people avoid conflict because they're afraid of, they're really afraid. If you've never been in a fight, if you've never been in a fist fight, then you might have a fear of conflict. I'm not saying you should get in a fist fight necessarily, although for a lot of you, it wouldn't hurt, honestly, to get in a fist fight. Because here's the thing, fear of death is fear of life. You cannot be brave, you cannot be confident. You're going to be afraid of life if you're afraid of death. Conquering your fear of death, conquering your fear of harm is going to make you not afraid of life, and is going to allow you to live your life fuller. And that's why avoiding conflict is such a bad thing, because when you're avoiding conflict, what you're saying is that I am willing to do what I need to do as long as I'm not going to get punched in the face. You're afraid of getting punched in the face, so your bubble of who you are and how you express yourself and your boundaries is very, very small, because it's very limited. You're not willing to go to the edge or go as far as it needs to go and take things to where they need to be, and people perceive that and they see that weakness, and they know that you're a victim. They can make a victim out of you, and they can get their way with you. So that doesn't mean that you just jump into any conflict. It doesn't mean that you should walk down the street and just punch people and try to get into conflict. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't try and resolve things in a non-conflict invoking way. But what it does mean is that when you get into conflict, you have to realize when conflict is necessary, not be afraid to confront it, and then do it the correct way. So let me tell you a quick story. So actually this just happened last night. I was lying in my bed, and I live in a residential neighborhood here. I haven't moved yet, but I'm in Tampa, Florida, and this is a pretty dang residential neighborhood. Like, what I mean is a suburb, like there's kind of nice houses. It is not like a party place or anything like that, right? So I'm lying there at like 1:30 in the morning, and both my wife and I are woke up, and we're hearing like this loud music, loud thumping, partying kind of music, and hearing the bass, and we're like, what the hell? What is going on, right? So my wife says, oh, I can't sleep, and I was having trouble sleeping too. So, I had a moment to decide there, right? Now, perhaps a few years ago, I would have said, oh, I don't want to make trouble. I'll just deal with this. I'll just whatever, or maybe I'll just call the cops on them, right? But I said, no, look, I'm going to go and deal with this situation. So I went, put on my clothes, walked out of my house, and went down the street, found the house where the loud music was, and I knocked on the door. And I said, hey, look, from here, it doesn't sound like your music is too loud, but it's disturbing me, and I can hear it and hear the bass, and I've got to daughter and wife that are having trouble sleeping. So could you please turn your music down? Maybe about 20% would be good. Now this drunk guy came out of there and he's giving me trouble and whatever. And he's like, oh, I don't, you don't know what you're talking about. Let's walk down the street and see if we can hear it, right? And he's got his wife or girlfriend or whatever. So, I'm walking with him and he says, what do you hear now? He says, stop, right? And he sort of grabs my arm. So I was like, okay, all right. So I hear the music. So he says, okay, well, let's go. Come on. So he walks down a little further and he grabs my arm and he says, stop. And I say to him, look, I don't want to get in an altercation with you, buddy, but it would be probably in your best interest if you do not touch me again. So let's talk, but I'm willing to hear what you have to say, but do not touch me, right? So that's a boundary. I'm ready to get in a conflict there. I am ready. My hands are out of my pocket. They're ready. My adrenaline is pumping. I'm ready to deal with the situation if I have to, but I'm trying to avoid the conflict if I can, right? I'm trying to not escalate it to that level. Now, when I say avoid the conflict, what I mean is the aggression. I've already engaged in conflict in that situation, right? You can see how clearly me walking out of my house and going to confront the situation was me ready to engage in conflict. I knew that there's probably going to be some conflict. Now, it turns out this guy, he ended up saying, oh, are you going to call the cops on me? And I told him, I said, I don't handle my situations by calling the cops. That's not the first thing that I do. And he proceeded to walk off, and he wasn't actually the owner of the house. So I went back to the house. I said, I'm going back to the house. Obviously, you're not in charge there, so I'm going to the house. And I went and knocked on the door again, rang the doorbell. And someone came out, and actually the guy that owned the house came out and he said, oh, I'm sorry, it's my wife's 40th birthday, and we'll turn it down. And they turn off the music, and there wasn't a problem. But I was ready to confront, and I didn't show any weakness because I was ready to handle whatever was going to happen in that situation. I wasn't afraid of the conflict. And so I got the situation taken care of, and as a benefit, I won't have to deal with that problem again. It's because I confronted that situation. Now, I could have taken another road here. I could have called the cops on him, done a passive aggressive thing, right, and not dealt with the conflict directly. And what might have happened was that the cops show up, he's all pissed off, right, because someone, dealt with it behind his back and said he did not confront him. And next night or a couple of weeks later, we have the same problem over and over again, right? Or I could be just living in resentment and just, my wife thinks that I don't have the balls to go and do what needs to be done, and I feel bad about myself, and I'm having to deal with this situation because I won't deal with it, and I lose respect for myself, right? And I can deal with that for weeks on end. Or, I could do what I did and resolve the situation then. And it might not have resolved as cleanly as it did, a good thing that it did, but I was willing to confront that situation. And that's the whole thing. It's like, you have to sometimes deal with conflict. And if you don't, I know people that are in feuds with their neighbors, and they've been in feuds with their neighbors for like years, right? And it's because they're not willing to deal with conflict. They're not willing to actually confront and say, hey, look, what's the problem? Let's resolve this. If it's going to come to blows, it's going to come to blows, but we're going to have this out. Let's have the conflict and let's get this over with so that it's done. Prolonging conflict is the same thing as avoiding conflict, because what you're doing is you're not actually escalating it to the level that it needs to be in order to be resolved. So we see this in a lot of situations in work, in relationships, and it actually makes things worse. When you just resolve the conflict and get it done with and get it over with, then it's done, and people can go on living their lives. When you draw out the conflict, or when you avoid the conflict completely, you're suffering either someone walking on you, they're violating your boundaries, or you lose respect for yourself, or you basically don't get what you want. You have to be able to, in a healthy way, go and accept and confront people and to have conflict. So how do you enter conflict? What do you do? First of all, like I said, it should be a last resort thing. You should not be bringing up conflict as the first thing. As soon as someone disagrees with you, you have a problem, you should be able to try to resolve that in a civil way. And maybe that is conflict. Me knocking on that door, I wasn't going over there to punch someone in the face. I could have gone over there all pissed off, but I said, okay, I'm going to go over there. I'm not avoiding it, but I'm going to go over there and I'm going to face that conflict, because there's probably going to be some kind of conflict. They want the music. I don't want the music. There's conflict there. I'm facing that. So first thing is you face it. You go for it. You figure out what needs to be done, but you do it in a calm way, right? You do it in a way where you are maintaining strength. You're not backing down. You're not being weak. You're coming across as strength, as having a purpose, but at the same time, you're gentle. You're not enraged. You're not coming from a place of emotion. You have a calm demeanor to you, a strength. Again, in the video I did on gravitas, you could say that you have gravitas. You appreciate the seriousness of the situation and you project that. You're not making light of it, but at the same time, you're not coming from this rage-fueled place. A lot of people, they get into bad conflict and they think conflict is bad because they do it from, what they do is they take it as long as they can and then they can't take it anymore and then they blow up. And that's when they get into conflict. You need to confront and get into conflict before you get to that point. So, and that's it, really. That's the formula for conflict. I think, again, a lot of situations that you might be in, I get a lot of questions, emails, and that's why I want to make this video, from developers, from people who are avoiding conflict. They're trying to resolve their problems without having conflict, without confronting people, and that it's never going to work, because until you're able to stand up for yourself, until you're able to address issues and work them out in a healthy way, and sometimes I'll be honest with you, sometimes it does come to an act of aggression. Sometimes it does. Sometimes that's just the way that things are going to go down, but you can't be afraid of that. If you're afraid to die, you're afraid to live. So, but if you learn to embrace conflict and to do it in an appropriate way and to gain control of yourself when you're in conflict, you're going to have a lot more success in life and relationships and everything. So hopefully this video is helpful to you. If you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and I will talk to you next time. Take care.